Good evening everyone and welcome to the final day of Women's Week. Tonight's webinar is about the DORCAS Trust and it is a great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Lorna Forde. Lorna studied zoology at Glasgow University and after graduation she had a role in Glasgow's housing department. She then completed a postgraduate qualification in dietetics. Her first experience of Glasgow Royal was when she did a student placement in the renal unit and recalls the difficulties of finding her way around the complex layout of wards and corridors. Following this, she worked in the community, undertaking research with physical disability teams, and then went on to do a master's degree in primary care. She completed her career when she was appointed lead for Greater Glasgow and Clyde Weight Management Service. Lorna joined the DORCAS committee when she retired a couple of years ago and has developed a keen interest in its history. She is therefore a perfect choice of speaker to present the story of this hospital-based charity that continues to provide comfort and equipment for the patients of the Royal Infirmary.
So thank you, Hilary. Today I am going to speak about two great Glasgow women, their connection to the DORCAS charity and also to the history of Glasgow Royal Infirmary. I hope this is quite a familiar sign to all of you. MABEL's tea room, which is based up in the Glasgow Royal Infirmary. I, probably like many of you over the years, have enjoyed the wonderful sandwiches and rolls there and the wonderful home baking. But I've never really thought what it was all about, or how it was funded. It has been an oasis for staff, visitors and patients alike through the years. But I just thought it was a part of the GRI. However, a couple of years ago, I was invited onto the committee for DORCAS. And that's when I discovered the great history that lay behind MABEL's and how it was funded. So what is Glasgow Royal Infirmary DORCAS Charitable Trust about? Well, it was funded by BEATRICE CLUGSTON in 1863, and you'll notice the date that Lister became surgeon in the Glasgow Royal Infirmary in 1860, so that sort of gives you a basis of the timeline of what we're talking about here. The aim was to give help and comfort to patients, both in hospital and during their convalescence. The name DORCAS was quite a strange name, but it actually is a biblical name from the book of Acts, from Tabitha or Dorcas. Dorcas, it seems, was raised from the dead by Peter, and she then dedicated her life to providing clothes for the poor, also helping the sick and the dying. This seemed to fit well for the beliefs of BEATRICE CLUGSTON, and she decided to call her charity that she set up DORCAS. There are other DORCAS societies internationally, but we are not affiliated with any of them. So a wee bit more about BEATRICE CLUGSTON, this little lady. It really is the only portrait that is around of her. I don't know if she actually was a beautiful woman, but it's not a particularly flattering, and some are more cartoonish and not really great, but anyway, she was a fantastic woman, born 19 September 1927, or 1827, I should say. That's nearly 200 years ago. She was the eldest of 5 children in a devout Christian and prosperous family living in the East End of Glasgow. She, her father was originally a banker, and then he opened a factory in Avonbank. I think they manufactured power pumps, which is not as famous, but really the most famous part was a bleaching factory. Now, the family took a sort of patriarchal role in overseeing their workers. They took great responsibility for their care, and young Beatrice and her mother often visited the homes of workers to see how the family were doing when they were sick, and provided food and money. There was also prayer said each day, led by young Beatrice for the women and by her father for the men. This is not as unusual as it sounds. If you think of David Dale in New Lanark, they had the same approach to his workers and their living conditions. Sadly, her father died not long after they moved to Avonbank, actually just about 5 years, when Beatrice was 28. And Beatrice was deeply impressed by the love, prayers and comfort that were offered to her father when he was dying, when he was sick and dying, and also to her and her family. And that set up the sort of foundations for her beliefs and what became her life's work in helping the poor, the dying and the sick. So if we move on a wee bit, after her father died, the family moved back to Glasgow. But this time, Beatrice in her life had actually lost 3 of her siblings. They hadn't reached the age of 10. Beatrice herself had been an invalid from 8 to about 18. I'm not sure what it was. It's not documented what was wrong with her, but she was actually bedridden for that length of time. But she, although impoverished, her mother and the remaining sibling, they decided to continue with this charitable work, and she started to visit the sick, the dying, the alcoholics, the prostitutes, and she was a regular visitor at the prison in Duke Street, the North Prison. And it was when visiting a patient there who was then admitted to the Glasgow Royal Infirmary because they had cholera that she was first time was shocked when she saw the conditions of the hospital at that time. So she hadn't been in hospital. Remember, this is before Florence Nightingale, when nurses, there wasn't a prescribed training or organised training for nurses. So they really were a sort of rough and ready bunch of helpers within hospitals. What she found there was no one to comfort the sick and the lonely, and a lack of warm clothing for patients at discharge. Many patients arrived in the hospital with infectious diseases such as cholera, as the person she had befriended had. So their clothes were immediately burned. This left them quite destitute. They hadn't the dignity of clothes within the hospital, but also they didn't have clothes for going home, and as we have today, it blocked their discharge. Beatrice then set up a clothing company, in that she employed a woman to make clothes, and she supplied these for the people going home, for the patients, so they could expedite their discharge. However, she, aged 35, Beatrice and her good friend known as ABC, or Anne B. Church, called a meeting of doctors' wives. And she boldly said to them she didn't know how they could sit back in their fine drawing rooms with all their maids and not feel for the poor souls who who were their husbands' patients. So she didn't pull her punches, but it worked. And in 1983, a committee was formed with the doctors' wives. So these women that she recruited, and others like-minded women, did home visits and hospital visits, really looking after their spiritual comfort, but also social services, offered social services. She was also, probably from her work in Avonbank with the workers there, she was very aware of the concerns, the financial concerns of families when they lost their breadwinner, and also the families worried about their family member in hospital. So she provided funds and helped them financially, and also for families who had quite far to travel, she provided money for transport for them. So we now have the sort of makings of what became the Almoners Department, the beginnings of it, and also the Medical Social Department a wee back in this time by Beatrice. Quite a woman. Beatrice carried on. Where did she get her money? Really from house-to-house collections and from Bible study groups. She also raised money then. The house-to-house collections continued until the start of the NHS in 1948, so into quite modern times. Beatrice also at a public meeting became the president of the DORCAS Society and convalescent homes. However, she very soon moved away from Dorcas to her real mission, which was to build convalescent homes. And this little woman from the East End of Glasgow became a fundraiser extraordinaire. She raised in total, through many bazaars in the Kibble Palace and in the Botanic Gardens, an extraordinary sum of £51,000. No one is quite sure how this woman, who was from the East End of Glasgow, made contacts with the city dignitaries. There were ministers, doctors, including Lister himself, businessmen, lords, and even royalty. There's an amazing list of people that she managed to include in her fundraising: the Duchess of Argyll, the Marquess of Lorne, who was married to Princess Louise, the daughter of Queen Victoria, and who was a woman with a great social conscience, who actually was involved throughout Beatrice's life in fundraising. And once, as it is now, you have titled people and famous people, and many others benefactors followed. So she was quite incredible in her fundraising abilities. That little leaflet is actually a bit of a minute from the DORCAS Society, just showing some of the money that had been gifted to them. So convalescent homes, this was her big, her belief that we needed somewhere for people to be looked after once they left the hospital. The first money she raised was for a convalescent home down in Dunoon. And it was opened in 1869, quickly followed by the Glasgow Convalescent Home in 1970. It was then moved, and more money was raised for it to be moved to Lenzie. We think the reason for that was that Bothwell was quite far from Glasgow, and Lenzie was on the train line between Glasgow and Edinburgh, so it was much more convenient. She also visited a Putney hospital where they had a hospital for the incurables, and she was really inspired by this, and she felt she needed a more residential place for those terminal conditions and near the end of life. So she established the Association of Relief of Incurables, the forerunner of the modern day hospice. So this is a way back in 1874. She looked around in the north of Glasgow again, and through funding from the Grand Bazaar in Kibble Palace, she opened Broomhill House, where I visited actually the remains of that, and more about that later. This is out in Kirkintilloch. It was opened for TB, cancer and chronic rheumatism. Miss CLUGSTON, however, put herself last in all of these things. Her mother felt her house was always bare and her carpets were worn with the number of people that she brought home to feed. She made no provision for herself. The trust did, and they actually gave her mother and her a house in Lenzie for a while. However, in the end, Beatrice's ill health came back, and she was sleeping towards the end in an attic in Broomhill House. And she died at 61 in her sleep, probably from heart failure. However, her legacy continued, and in 1893, Broomhill could accommodate about 100 patients. It continued on. In 1904, the Lanfine House for TB was added, and in the 1960s, it was a home for geriatric patients. By 1975, it had been taken over by the NHS, Greater Glasgow, and it was a place for young chronic sick. This was quite an amazing place for its time. It was, it really believed in increasing and promoting independence no matter the degree of disability, and was a forerunner of real self-empowerment for patients. And if you get a chance to look at some of the archives from it, it's really quite amazing, the equipment that they developed there in the workshops that the patients worked in, and it is, was really ahead of its time. Unfortunately, this was closed in 1995. I forgot to say, actually, the other part of Broomhill House, which was unusual way back in the 1900s, was that they kept £100 a month back for those incurables who remained at home. So again, she was doing a sort of wrap-round care service and trying to cover all groups of patients, as we would see nowadays. There is an old Isle cemetery, a magnificent, once magnificent memorial to Beatrice. It was a bronze carving by Pittandre McGilvray, but unfortunately 10 years ago the bronze was stolen for scrap. However, there's been a bit more interest in Beatrice CLUGSTON recently, and we have supported that. The East Bartonshire Council has agreed to look into ways of restoring the monument, which I think would be a wonderful thing. Broomhill House is interesting. It has been bought over by Calla Homes, and they're going to call the estate Beatrice Meadows. They have donated for a very small bit of money, the once beautiful gardens at Broomhill House, which had really beautiful walled gardens and greenhouses and all sorts of things growing there. So some members of local groups have decided to band together and form a sort of Friends of Broomhill Gardens to try and restore it. However, there are a few caveats to it. Broomhill House was built on a high piece of land, but the rest of the land, not the gardens, but where the Callar's building is actually on a flood plain. So they are getting into some difficulties. There is a dual access road, and it seems that with the gardens, we'd have to take on the maintenance of that road. So there's a lot of things still to be worked out. We have been in contact, or they contacted us, and we visited the site and really enjoyed various stories and reminiscing about Broomhill House itself and about Beatrice CLUGSTON. I said I was going to speak about two great Glasgow women. The second one I want to speak about is Mabel McKinlay, who is the namesake of Mabel's tea room that we mentioned at the start. She was another lady from Glasgow, and she was born to a very prosperous temperance family in 1876, and her other claim to fame was that she is a cousin of the famous Miss Cranston. As a young married woman, and she did have 6 children, she visited Stobhill Hospital, which was a military hospital at the time for soldiers for World War I. And after the war, Mrs. McKinlay wanted to continue her work, so joined the DORCAS Society as a ward visitor. She also worked in the clothing room, and she noticed also that when visitors came, there was nowhere to get a cup of tea. And she spoke to the hospital board and was given a small room where she could serve tea and sandwiches. So Mabel was given a small room in the outpatients department, the old outpatients department, and she started a non-profit making tea service 5 days a week. The workers were very strictly supervised by Mabel, and each took in a pan loaf made into sandwiches, 20 cakes and 20 scones, and had to bring a clean penny. When Mrs. McKinlay retired at age 91, her 5 days voluntary service was very hard to be replaced. And from that time, a paid manager and some voluntary helpers and a nucleus of paid staff ensured the continuity of the service. This continued for nearly 40 years, but Mabel's is now run by a team of paid workers and a voluntary committee, which includes social work representation, GIRI staff representation, and some paid professionals who do sessional work for the charity. So this is a picture of the original tea trolley, or one of the original tea trolleys, and you can see on it says DORCAS Society and Almoners Fund. at Glasgow Royal Infirmary, and you can see the very smartly dressed patients and visitors of the day. I think many of you have seen this, the fabulously refurbished MABEL's tea room. We have now reopened, but adhering to social distancing, we've had to move out some of the tables. However, this has been a great relief that we can give this service again, and a wee bit more about the advantages of it to our income, the help to our income of opening the tables again, I'll discuss. So sticking to Beatrice's first initiatives and the aims of the DORCAS Society, we still have a clothing room. All clothing now is supplied as new. It's good quality and it's bought from local warehouses, and the staff member who is in charge of this really drives a hard bargain with these warehouses to get the best quality at the cheapest prices. We tend to supply tracksuits, waterproof jackets, warm waterproof jackets, nightwear, underwear, shoes, a little pack of toiletries, and a little tea starter kit for going home. We are told by the ward staff that in normal times this was greatly appreciated, but this has been even more so during the COVID restriction times, where visitors, so family, could not come in with clean clothes or anything for their, any toiletries or anything for their family members who were patients. This has put a great strain on the clothing department, and it has and our supply. So it's with great relief that people can now drop off clothing for their family in the hospital, and I'm sure with great relief especially for members of the committee who have been working very, very hard to keep the clothing room supplied. It certainly has taken a knock in our very reduced finances as well, so this is something that we need to build up again. So donations to the Royal, the charity, continue to provide items that and funding for equipment from the wards for seating, etc. Right back at the beginning, one of the first things that Beatrice bought after she set up the DORCAS Society was an invalid chair for each ward. I know as a worker within the Royal, our service were constantly requesting, looking for places that we could request seats for. And now at our monthly meetings, the DORCAS charity, our most popular request is still for seating, so some things never change. But one of our most noteworthy projects was for the Snowdrop Chapel in the Princess Royal Maternity Unit. This was commissioned in 2001 and funded by DORCAS. And we have still maintained our links with social work. As I said before, someone from social work attends our meetings monthly, and we support requests for clients of theirs as they're submitted on a monthly basis. So we can see that DORCAS has tried very, very hard to stay faithful to the aims of Mabel's, I will call her Mabel, Beatrice, when she set up DORCAS. So we provide clothing, we provide spiritual and social comfort and services. We provide money where it's needed and equipment to the patients, inpatients and outpatients. So where are we now in 2021? Reduction in patient and visitor numbers have really hit the charity hard. Sadly, takings were down by 50% during lockdown. And sadly, again, redundancies had to be considered, and they took place in consultation with the staff. So this was very difficult times for members of the committee that were involved in this, and for the staff members that it affected. Now, with the improving situation, we actually just had our monthly meeting on Wednesday, and for the first time we've had an improvement in our income, and possibly directly related to the tables being now put out in the tea room. So hopefully we will weather this storm and continue with Beatrice and Mabel's work. So it's just left to say, please do come and enjoy Mabel's. You know that the kind of work that you're supporting, and thank you for listening. I would also like to give thanks to Dr. Frances Dryborough, who compiled most of the information here on these great Glasgow women. And if you want to know anything more about each of them, you can go to the DORCAS website or to Friends of Glasgow Royal Infirmary website. Thank you for listening.